Hey everybody. I decided to be inside today because the air show is happening outside, and I wanted to use this time to talk about, how does a guy like Donald Trump get into power and how did we get here? I think it's actually quite simple. For a long time, people have felt disconnected with politics. The processes to do democracy have been swayed in the favor of bigger interests, excluding voices. And we get to a point where it then lends itself to these kind of more bombastic politicians. And I read this really cool book about direct democracy. And James Fishkin out of Stanford said something really interesting, and he's doing some interesting things. When people are not actively engaged in discussions about policies, what happens is they retrench, they become more dismissive, they then kind of question the entire process, and on the extreme ends, they reject the process altogether, and they'll lead protests. And so, for example, in our democracy, when there are segments of the population that are being excluded, decision making and policy, they dismiss the policy, they dismiss the politicians altogether. And this is I'm not trying to make this into a Republican or Democrat thing, but there have been politicians prior to Trump who did not campaign in certain states, in certain parts of the country, because either their support was diminishing or there wasn't a strong enough reason for them to be there. But it also kind of sent a signal and shockwave to that area to say, you're not really part of the fabric of what I, as the presidential candidate, am putting forward. And so I'm going to exclude your community, your state, from this direct democracy process. What that does to a person is it sends a little bit of a signal to say, I'm disconnected from Washington. I'm not part of that anymore. What Fishkin says is that as you disconnect people, they start thinking the process is totally rigged or, in favor of a specific group. And this is precisely what we see with, Trump ushering in a very different form of democracy. And people who are very much saying, like, when he says the fake news media, it's because news media has also contributed by framing issues in a very specific way as well, or not talking about issues. There's a dismissive tone sometimes by media towards specific issues. Here in Canada, Canadian national broadcaster, the CBC, recently did this kind of like tongue-in-cheek joke at the Freedom Convoy. And for those that don't, it's the trucker convoy that blocked our nation's capital in 2022, labeling them as these anti-vaxxers, these people who just didn't know what they were talking about, etc. And so while some may laugh and kind of poke fun at the truckers, I think when media does these things, it sends a shockwave a little bit. It says that you're not part of that policy making process anymore. You're othered. And, what that does is that makes people very dismissive of the entire process as a whole, which is why today in Canada, you see people saying defund the CBC. It's a big movement that even the Conservative Party of Canada's leader, Pierre Poilievre, is pushing for. And so this is what happens when people are excluded from the policy and the decision-making process. It lends itself to more extremist, not extremist, but more bombastic thinking. You couple that with someone like Trump, who's a salesperson, a really good salesperson at that. What you then have is someone who is selling you something. Even now, Trump, in every podcast, every interview, he has to get his talking points in because he's always in sales mode. He's pitching something always, and people may not realize that. And he's pitching, what the Democrats have done to the United States and what he will do differently. He's not going to talk about specific things that go against his sales pitch. Instead he's going to double down on that. The Democrats, Biden, Harris, have been terrible for the country, worst president, worst vice president in history. And so I think you get a Donald Trump when people feel disconnected with the process and they feel like their voices are not being heard. So where do we go from here? One thing I've noticed is even those on the left have been engaging in the type of rhetoric that Donald Trump has ushered in. Just a few years ago, Michelle Obama had said something, when they go low, we go high. But if you look at Barack Obama's speech at the Democratic National Convention a few weeks ago, I would argue that wasn't the Obama that I remember as president. It didn't come across as presidential. There were personal attacks against Trump littered throughout. It obviously was rallying around Kamala Harris, but as it should have been. But it wasn't when they go low, you go high type speech. And I think that's the reality of the Donald Trump effect, that Trump has ushered in a new way of doing politics based on the exclusion of certain communities across the United States that have now become quite emboldened and have now occupy various facets of the electorate that the Democrats can't just turn away. So we have to acknowledge that. But to be honest, I think the reason why Trump and this kind of a more bombastic politics has happened is because we as civil society may have not been as robust enough in having very tough conversations with each other, with our families, with friends, and demanding that from our media and from our politicians. And let me explain what I mean. We have to get to a place where we normalize very challenging conversations in order for our democracy to work. And when I was in university, we would study like media from the 1960s and 70s. And there were events that would happen at night, prime time, where there would be like a really good interview with a head of state, a leader, or there would be a debate on a topic that people were just genuinely interested in hearing. And that would be like the news of the next day at the water cooler conversation. And the nightly news was this really place where there was an exchange of ideas, or there were segments of an exchange of ideas. And that has been replaced now with more inflammatory political rhetoric on all sides. And so what we're seeing in our leaders is a reflection of what we are now seeing in our media and what we're in a way demanding. Whereas I feel like in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, there were more thoughtfully crafted media pieces that shaped people's ideas on the way forward. And we've kind of lost that. I think the way we get back to a level of that is we'll need more thoughtful dialogue everywhere, on every topic, or as many topics as possible. And it needs to be very normalized in our society. It can't be hidden away. It can't be something where someone says, well, I'm not going to talk about that. I mean, certainly there are things that we don't want to talk about. I agree. But there should be a normalizing of just challenging conversations that we consume. It needs to be part of our day-to-day. It needs to be part of our lives in some meaningful way, just as fashion or style or movies or music or art is. I think normalizing tough conversations needs to be part of that as well. And when that isn't normalized, we get the Donald Trumps, we get very inflammatory, bombastic politics that is more divisive than everything. Even here in Canada, we're seeing, the Conservatives under Poilievre engage in very inflammatory rhetoric towards the Liberals and NDP. And I don't think that's a good thing for our nation. I think it's good in the short run, get yourself elected, sure. But in terms of the nation and where the nation goes, we need leaders who see past 4 years cycles and see 20, 30, 40 years past their term, what the country looks like. So a really important piece of this, and this goes back to James Fishkin's work, is normalizing dialogue is very important, because when we normalize tough conversations, we're saying to segments of the population that agree or disagree that your voice is part of this discourse. It's part of this dialogue, right? So when we say we're going to talk about vaccinations and anti-vaxxing or the Freedom Convoy, what we're saying by having those conversations is there are segments of the population that agree with the Freedom Convoy, and they're now going to be part of this national dialogue on this topic. And so I think that's how we kind of reclaim, I hate to say that word, but reclaiming our democracy through direct democracy is really important. And so, asking and demanding of our national media that we fund with our public tax dollars, that they include that back into our discourse on a regular basis is one of the steps we can take. Another step, of course, is, listening to the Open Minds podcast and other things like that. But I think that we need more thoughtful dialogue from all sides baked into our nightly news, into our society as a whole. This running away from that has led us down this path of extreme politics, which is just not good for society. And there are just an endless amount of topics that can be included. And what's really important to that facilitation is we need people who are facilitating it with a genuine curiosity. So, I don't want to plug myself and be this whole sales pitch, but we do need people who are framing the questions in a way that's very curious, not kind of narrow. And so that's a really important point, and one that I wanted to end on, because I wanted to kind of end this with one thing I've read with Socrates, thousands of years ago when Socrates was here, he said something along the lines of being skeptical in how things are being framed. And because, what is the answer that question by its framing is trying to get at? And, always kind of consuming our mind with the kind of pursuit of truth and justice is in fact the hallmark of a well-functioning society. And I think we've lost a little bit of that. We're too kind of fixated on, what politician says about another politician instead of, the pursuit of truth. And I think the pursuit of truth happens through really challenging conversations that are curious. So let me know what you think, and if you agree with this kind of thought process on how we kind of reclaim our democracy. I hate to say that word, and how we demand more from our politicians as well. As always, I'm Christopher, the host of the Open Minds podcast. Link below to everything, and I'll catch you in the next one.